Discover on this episode of These Three Things how performing Dylan Thomas nearly cost my guest his place at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts.
I remember walking into the Royal Academy and there was an actor who was adjudicating the auditions and his name was John Deteen, and I kind of recognised him from television. And he almost didn't look up, but he went, "Matthew Evans?" And I went, "Yes," because Matthew Rhys Evans is my full name. "Matthew Evans, yes." And he just went, "Speeches." And I went, Henry VI Part 3 and Under Milk Wood. And the second I finished the D of Wood, he looked up and he went, "It's a little obvious for a Welshman, isn't it?"
Hello and welcome back to These Three Things, the podcast that asks which person, place and treasured possession have made a profound impact upon your life and why. My guest today is undoubtedly one of Wales's greatest exports. Matthew Rhys has called both the East and West Coast of America home for quite some time, but he is known and admired on both sides of the Atlantic for his exceptional acting talent, be it on stage or screen. He trained at the prestigious Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and soon after graduating landed a prize role in The Graduate alongside Kathleen Turner in the West End. From there onwards, it was a steady line to the top, winning roles such as Kevin in Brothers and Sisters, still one of the best box sets of all time in my humble opinion, to his starring role as Phillip Jennings in the spy drama The Americans, which rightly saw him win a Lead Actor Award at the Emmys in 2018. Matthew Rhys, lovely to see you. Thank you for being a guest. How is it living in America today?
Well, that's a very big question at this time.
I thought it might be.
Yes, I don't quite know where to begin. I'm going to be honest, the mood of the nation is definitely a little, I was going to say depressed, but it seems to be already moving into anger, concern, which in its own way is motivating the right responses, the right kind of action to be taken. It's definitely divided. I would say it's a slightly sad state of affairs, especially when you look back at, the more halcyon years of Obama and Biden, where they strove to do the simplest of things like education and healthcare, and now it's just at its polar opposite.
I see. Well, yes, I mean, we see it from here too. So maybe the right time to move back to Wales.
Oh my God, I would jump in a heartbeat.
Oh, well, we'd have you back in a heartbeat. So am I allowed to ask, I know you've been working tirelessly through the night. Am we allowed to ask what you're up to at the moment?
Yes, indeed. I'm currently filming. In fact, we finished tonight. It's our last night. I'm filming a series for Netflix with Claire Danes called The Beast in Me, which is an 8-part limited thriller. But it's a slight cat and mouse game between myself and Miss Danes, but you have to figure out who's the cat and who's the mouse.
Okay, brilliant. So out later this year on Netflix?
Out to the end of the year on Netflix, yeah.
Oh, and congratulations on wrapping this evening and getting some sleep. I know you're a father of children as well and busy with your life.
Yes.
So let's get stuck in, if I may. Why don't we start with your person? I'd be really interested to hear, who have you chosen and why?
I have chosen a man by the name of Dorian Thomas from South Wales, Pontypridd in South Wales, and was, and still is, an enormous influence on my life. He came into my life when I was 16 years old at the National Youth Theatre of Wales in Cardiff. And he was one of the directors of the play. We did the Bacchae, the Greek tragedy. And he did many things, but he was kind of arresting in his first few meetings because I'd never met anyone like it. And in a way, I suppose he was antithetical to what sometimes the cliched version of Welsh people are. He was incredibly confident and incredibly assured of his own knowledge and prowess, and was unapologetic in his attitude, which I don't always think is the Welsh way. And to me, that was kind of revelatory and just a great influence. And then the offset of that initial meeting was just a number of things, like he taught me the appreciation of language and how important it was to read and to educate yourself and to further yourself and to be as well armed as possible, so that you can be unapologetic.
Fantastic. So how old were you now when you're joining this youth theatre? And
Yes.
was he teaching you solely in English, or were you performing in Welsh as well?
No, we were. He was directing the Welsh language production, but his sort of command and knowledge of the English language and English literature was as equal part. He's an incredibly intelligent man who had a true love for what was Wales's identity, and was very much in search of who are we as a people, and could regale you with how our kind of Celtic foundations formed who we were, and how the industrial age informed who we were, and at each evolutionary turn, how we shaped as a nation, as an identity. And he was obsessed by that, and through that knowledge, it gave me a kind of a more detailed and kind of safer version of who we were. We're not just the small neighbours of England. We were this incredible nation to be proud of.
Hear, hear. And would you say it was in those formative years that your love and your taste and your absolute bug for acting began?
Absolutely. He was incredibly enthusiastic in everything. And I was a great fan of Richard Burton prior to that moment. And from everything I read about Burton had this slight shame about acting. And what Dorian said to me was, unapologetically, it is one of the greatest art forms you can be a part of. And so he really enthused me in that sense. So much so, it was really down to him that I wanted to return to the National Youth Theatre again when I was 17, to work with him specifically again, because his teaching was just so enormous and so widespread. He worked on so many levels. Everything influenced everything else, and he was very big on that. And then, as a consequence of, we did a Mayakovsky adaptation of The Bedbug when I was 17, and as a result of that, it was that production that made me think, well, actually, I do want to try and become a professional actor. And I went to him with that conversation. I said, I think I do want to give it a go. I know, with as we regard the Welsh as these great storytellers, and we have our great tradition of Eisteddfod, I think a number of people slightly regard the arts sometimes in Wales as a hobby. And I said, I don't want it to be a hobby. I do want it to be my profession. To which he was incredibly excited. And then we went at it then together.
Brilliant.
To look at speeches for drama school. And then he would take, I had my Richard Burton, Phillip Burton moment. He would take me up to Pontypridd to Rockingstone Terrace, to where we would, with Dr. William Price would, orate the kind of reintroduce the Druids to the Eisteddfod. So he would make me do my speeches up in Pontypridd on Rockingstone Terrace.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you remember what your RADA audition pieces were? Did he choose them for you, or did you have the final say?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. So he was like, don't do something obvious. Stay away from Romeo and Hamlet and all the obvious ones, because I'm sure any adjudicator will just be glad to see something different. So we picked a speech from Henry VI, Part 3, which is an incredible speech. There's this incredible speech where his son has just been killed by the Queen, and he retaliates. So we worked tirelessly on that speech. And then I obviously had this great love of Dylan Thomas. So I said, I want to do something from Under Milk Wood. And he said, don't do it. Do not walk in as a cliche and do Under Milk Wood. And I said, no, I'm going to. So, and he was very gracious. He went, all right, if that's your choice, if that's what you're impassioned about, we can do that. And I remember walking into the Royal Academy, and there was an actor who had attended the Royal Academy who was adjudicating the auditions, and his name was John Deteen. And I kind of recognized him from television. And he almost didn't look up, but he went, Matthew Evans? And I went, yes, because Matthew Rhys Evans is my full name. Matthew Evans, yes. And he just went, speeches. And I went, Henry VI, Part 3. And Under Milk Wood. And for the second I finished the D of Wood, he looked up and he went, it's a little obvious for a Welshman, isn't it? And I went, oh no, I've blown it. I've already blown it. And Dorian was right.
But you didn't.
I didn't, because I finished the speeches, and John and Tina went, all right. Listen, we're going to invite you back for a second audition. I'd like you to change the Undermilk Wood to something very different. Something like Tennessee Williams. And I went, okay, thanks very much, sir. So yeah, I did Sweet Bird of Youth on my second audition and third audition, and then
got in. So
and then
you
got
went
in.
at 18 and you were
At
in.
18.
Tell me, did Dorian get to see you, obviously from The Graduate and onwards? Did he get to see a lot of your work on stage?
He didn't. Unfortunately, he passed a long time ago, far too prematurely of cancer, and didn't see many of anything. What I did do was I won a scholarship.
Wow.
Yeah. Hang on. You got to take a moment. Oh, I haven't thought about him in such a long time.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's lovely. Can I ask you in that moment, did any of his family alive?
Yes, his mother still is, yeah.
What I love, one of the reasons I love this podcast so much is that the people that we choose don't often know that we're choosing them, and some of them get to hear in the episode, and they realize in that moment just the profound effect that individual made in shaping the rest of your life. So when they come up in this way, in this context, it really taps into that archive, and rightly so. It can, especially on No Sleep. So to that darling man in heaven, to Dorian Thomas, without which I wouldn't have had the glory of Kevin in Brothers and Sisters, which I just rewatched, by the way, with my mum. So sadly he passed young of cancer. You said, yeah.
He did, yeah, throat cancer, but I got this. I got this evening It was an Evening Standard scholarship, which was presented to me at 18 at the Evening Standard Drama Awards by
wow.
Yeah, by Diana Rigg. She was the adjudicator for that scholarship, and then I got this moment to thank Dorian in that acceptance speech, and that's when he called me up and he said, I saw it, and we did it.
We did it. Oh, how wonderful!
Yeah, so that to me was a very big moment. One of the things I loved the most, we would kind of work for hours on these speeches up in Pontypridd. And when he felt like we'd cracked it and we were in a good place, we would then go to the Greyhound pub. And
fair point.
Yes, or more than one. And it was it was the incredible, it was the reverence in which I saw he was held by those predominantly at that time men. It was a very kind of male pub, but it was just the wealth of characters he introduced me to in Pontypridd that I still hold dear. There was one man called, as you know, the great Welsh tradition of, if you are a David, you often become a Di, and then often your profession then follows that Di. So it was like, Di the post, Di the milk. And there was one man in the pub called Die Substantial. Yeah. And then, so in a quiet moment, I said, why is he called Die Substantial?
I'd love to know.
I was terrified, obviously, of the answer. And Dorian said, oh, he's much more innocent than that. He said, he's relatively new to the area. And he started drinking the Greyhound pub, and he introduced himself. My name's David. And we all went, oh, Die, we've got another Die. And he said, listen, I know I'm going to be Die something, but I'm retired now. So whatever you are going to call me, just make sure it's something substantial. So henceforth, he became Die Substantial.
Okay. And I've got to ask you, what was Dorian's tipple? Did he like a whiskey or a Guinness?
He was always his joke was cooking lager. So like terrible lager, like Foster's, Castlemate Forax. It was
rubbish.
terrible cooking lager. So So when I got into RADA, I sent him a keg of lager.
Did you?
I did, yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, well, to him in heaven, to Dorian Thomas, what a great story and what a great beginning.
Yeah.
Truly influential and inspirational. Perhaps I could just segue to your place.
Yes.
Where have you chosen? Where's that special place that always feels like home for you?
Well, I actually really struggled with that question because there are a number of places. Obviously, Cardiff is incredibly dear to my heart, and Fishguard, where my mother's from, where we spent endless summers, and Mid Wales and Machynlleth, where my father's from, we spend usually Easters. And obviously didn't want to offend neither mother nor father or the good people of Cardiff. So I was wondering if we could kind of break it down to, and just,
Well, it could be any. This is the thing, for some people, it literally is your kitchen table where
right.
everything, all of life, and conversation begins and ends for so many people. Or your granny's armchair. It doesn't have to be, a beach in Newport, Pembrokeshire. So where did
Yeah.
you end up going?
I hate to say this now, hopefully we can dive into it, but I'm going to choose Wales, and I'll tell you why. Because
Please do.
I think of it so often in many ways when there's a number of things that I think of and I go, oh God, I'd love to be in Pembrokeshire now. I'd love to be in Mid Wales now. I'd love to be in a Welsh pub now. I'd love to be in the Brecon Beacons now. And I find as I get older, the thought comes far more often and far quicker. I'm obviously becoming far more nostalgic, and I don't quite want to say melancholic, but nostalgic, definitely. And I suppose raising a kid in New York, there's a number of elements now, and I go, oh, he'll never experience that. Do you know what I mean? He'll never do crabbing off the quay wall in Pembrokeshire. He'll never do the Boy Scout camp in Beckett. So I think of those things far, far more often, and how they influenced me and how they shaped me. And I suppose it's also very related to the people of Wales, not just to touch on Dorian, but also the humour I miss so enormously of Wales. I'm very lucky on this job. I get driven every morning, and there's this great ex-New York policeman who drives me, and he kind of said, well, tell me about Wales. And I realized but I spoke at length for about this hour as I told him all about Wales. And he asked me, but what do you miss the most? I said, I tell you what I miss the most is how when you go home and you sit with your school friends and they sledge you straight away, you sit down and the first thing they do is eviscerate you. And I said, and that's what I miss the most. So I suppose there is a pub in Whitchurch called The Plough where I would meet all my school friends. What I'm at my happiest is when I am laughing at how much we are taking each other down in the most brutal way. And obviously, because of my career and where I live, I am prime for that evisceration. And it's what I enjoy the most. It's when I laugh it's when I laugh till I cry.
And when were you last home? I mean, I still think that you can do those things with your son, certainly in late summers. I mean, I've done them with my daughter, and Pembrokeshire is my place. And you're right, there's something about hitting that West Coast and that landscape, and there's no reception.
Yeah.
And you go for those walks on the beach, and then you sink a pint of Guinness at the boat club, and you just look out and you just think, there's nothing like it. There's nowhere like it in the world. For me, not for me either.
The same. There's something very magical about Pembrokeshire. Where do you go in Pembrokeshire? Are you in Newport? Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, that's...
and I've been going since I was 4. And
no way.
Honestly, you can go around the world, and if you put me there, where we're going for Easter, for 2 days with Lily, and I'm like the happiest I can be.
Yes, and there's a number of, I think, those of us who joke that if you have the sun in Pembrokeshire, you can beat the Riviera. It's like
true.
It's like we'll take on the Amalfi Coast, we'll take it all, we'll take on the south of France, because if you give it the sun, we've got it. And I truly believe, like, I have true halcyon memories of Pembrokeshire, of kind of learning to sail. My uncle was a sea captain on the ferries from Fishguard to Ireland, and
wow,
was part of one of the teachers of the sea cadets, and he taught me how to sail and gave me a love of the sea and boats. And staying in my grandfather was the local pharmacist in Fishguard, and lived above his old shop. And the memories of waking up in the kind of the flat above the old pharmacy and hearing the seagulls still is one of the most evocative. So when I hear seagulls to this day, it's one of the most evocative sounds to me of being truly and purely happy and not wanting to be anywhere else, and just excited to get up and put a mackerel head on a hook and throw it off the side of a quay wall.
Oh, it sounds idyllic. When I think of seagulls, so I just think hide your chips. They're brutal.
I know.
They really have no shame.
No, especially the Welsh ones. I know.
brilliant, beautiful. Well, you couldn't have chosen a finer country, in my opinion. But okay, let's segue now to the third and final question, your treasured item.
Yes.
So, if you were stripped of anything,
Hmm.
everything, and you could take just one thing with you, what
Yes.
would that be?
My treasured item I actually lost, which I'm
No.
yes, which I was devastated about, and it was a short-lived moment. It was, as I just referenced, my grandfather in Pembrokeshire. I was about 9 years old at the time, and I was going to go to Sea Cadets camp with my uncle, and I desperately wanted a knife, a folding knife. Everyone took a small pen knife, but my parents were like, "You're not old enough to have one." And then my grandfather took me to this shop called Tenby House, which is in Fishguard, and he bought me a fisherman's folding knife, and it was one of the greatest rites of passage for me in my life, where my grandfather said, without saying, "I'm going to trust you with this. I will buy you the knife, but I'm trusting you with this." So, because my mum was like, "You'll stab yourself or you'll stab someone." And to me, it was an incredible moment because completely unsaid, he was saying, "I think you're ready to have a knife, and I will imbue you with that trust and that maturity." So we walked very quietly, and he bought me this beautiful pearl-handled,
Beautiful.
fisherman's knife that had a blade and a descaling blade and the V fork for pulling out hooks. And I couldn't have been happier in that moment than having this knife. And I literally held it in my hand for days afterwards. I was so ecstatic to have it. And then on the Sea Cadets camp, we went on a very long hike, and I had it in my rucksack, and I got back to camp and I went into my rucksack and I couldn't find it. And very quickly, I became this seething ball of panic as I went through my rucksack trying to find it, and I tore the camp apart. And I still to this day,
Yeah, you can feel
slightly,
it. Yeah.
I'm slightly bereft by the fact that I'd lost
Yeah.
it. And another thing was, strangely enough, I couldn't stop crying about it because it had been such a big moment for me. And I remember all the other people in the Sea Cadets camp were looking at me like, "Oh, it's just a penknife. What is wrong with that kid?"
I know, but it wasn't.
No. So I went back to my grandfather, and I said, I said, "I've got very bad news. I lost the knife you gave me." Praying he would go, "Don't worry, we'll go to Tenby House and I'll get you another one." And he looked at me with the most knowing look and nodded and went, "Oh," as in, "Well, that's a real shame." And to me, in that moment, it was one of the great life lessons about not necessarily the more material things in our lives, but things in general, that you just have to take care. Things have value.
Look after them.
Yes, and
Yeah.
should be cared for, and the things you value, regardless of whether they're material or not, need to be cared for. And it was a great lesson for him to go, "I'm not going to," he didn't say it, because "I'm not going to buy you another one, because you need to sit through this pain in this moment and learn a valuable lesson." And I
And
did.
it stayed with you. Yeah.
It has stayed with
And
me.
I'm imagining you were about 7 or 8 at this time.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when you first see, I suppose, that an elder has put their trust in you, and that
Yes.
you are an independent little being, separate to mum
Yes.
and dad, helicoptering your every move, going,
Yeah.
I can do this.
Yes.
And that's what went in that moment as well, which is heartbreaking.
It was, and it's weirdly, it still kills me to this day that I
Do you
that I
think
lost
another
that
cadet
knife.
maybe pinched off with it?
Could possibly have
We
found
could
it and
get it
got
back after this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Put it out.
Please return too.
Put your feelers out in Pembrokeshire.
You
'cause
never know. You never know.
Yeah, it's a beautiful pearl-handled fishing knife. But it was more the lesson that I learned from him with regards to that moment. That's kind of, and also about the trust you place in others as well. And I had, it's not that similar, but I just remember recently my son said, "I want to cut the bread myself." And I kept saying, no, you're not. I'm not going to let you cut a piece of bread. And then I remember the moment when my grandmother went, "I'll buy you a knife." So very recently, in the last 2 weeks,
It's come full circle.
My son has started cutting his own bread.
Really?
Which still
Bless his heart.
terrifies me. But in that moment, what I think of is my grandfather and that knife.
It's something, isn't it, when you think, oh, maybe they're going to replace it and just say, don't worry, we'll get another one, which I'm sure your granny would have done.
Of course.
But coming from the patriarch, it's
No.
like,
No,
sit that one out, kid.
This is the lesson you have to learn in this moment. To which at the time I thought was incredibly brutal, of course, but it's stayed with me and I've learned from it.
For sure. Oh, Matthew, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much.
I was about to apologize that there's a distinct lack of sleep that has led me to a number of blank moments, so I apologize for those.
Not at all, which makes it even more special because I know your time is precious and you've got one night ahead of you, so all the best. But to Dorian Thomas in heaven, to your beloved Wales and all parts of it from north to south, and that penknife that we still might retrieve, we don't know.
We don't know.
Thank you so much.
Wherever it lies, yes, may it give someone else as much pleasure as it did me for those brief moments.
Lovely to see you, and I can't wait to look at the Netflix series later this year.
Thanks, Deb.
And thank you for joining us today for another episode of These Three Things. If you have particularly enjoyed this conversation, please do share it with a friend. Press subscribe or follow on your preferred platform. And if you have an extra minute, a comment or review is greatly appreciated. We release episodes every fortnight, so until next time, thank you and take care.